Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we are going to look at leadership, but through a really unique lens.
Yeah, through the lens of metaphors, actually.
Metaphors, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And this all comes from a really interesting book called The Power of Leadership Metaphors by Peter Shaw.
And the thing is, right away, when we say metaphors, people might think, oh, this is kind of a soft, fluffy topic.
Right.
But it's not. These are actually like practical tools that can help you understand new fields quickly, but also just be more effective in leadership roles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so Peter Shaw, in this book, he's compiled 200 prompts.
Yeah.
And when he talks about metaphors, he talks about proverbs,
Right.
idioms.
Like little nuggets of wisdom that we hear all the time.
Yeah.
But he's specifically using them to stimulate your imagination and creativity around leadership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this is your express route to understanding how metaphors can enhance leadership and influence and even approach strategy.
And what's so interesting is like we all use metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
They're so ingrained in the way that we think and speak,
Yes.
but we don't often stop to think about them intentionally
Yeah, that's true.
and their power, you know?
Exactly.
So, metaphors like the seed has to die or light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
These metaphors help us to understand complex concepts
Right.
in a way that really sticks.
Because it's a story or an image.
Exactly.
And we latch onto that.
Our brains are wired for that kind of
Yeah,
imagery.
exactly. And Shaw, in his book, he structures it really nicely. He gives each metaphor its own page.
Yeah.
He explains it and then crucially gives 3 reflective questions.
Right.
Which is the important part because that's where you start thinking, how can I apply this to my own life?
Absolutely.
And to kind of illustrate these ideas, he uses these recurring characters.
Yeah.
He has Ben Gillian, William Sarah, Harry, Carol, Brenda, and Rashid.
Yeah.
And they pop up in all these different leadership scenarios to kind of really illustrate those concepts.
And they make it very relatable.
Yeah.
You can see yourself in those scenarios very easily.
Exactly.
Now, he also organized these metaphors around his 4 V's of leadership framework,
Right.
which is vision, values, value add, and vitality. And that's from a previous book of his,
Right.
which is interesting because it gives you a kind of a very structured way of looking at all the different dimensions of leadership.
Yes.
He also includes sections on potential risks and eternal truths, which I really like.
Right.
Because those are the things that have always been true for leaders and will continue to be true.
Right, exactly. And it's not just theoretical, right? Like we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, all these metaphors pop up.
Yeah, like bottle the positives, you know,
exactly.
which is really fascinating because it shows how in times of crisis, we often turn to metaphors
Exactly.
to try and make sense of what's going on.
Right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to really unpack some of these most insightful metaphors from Shaw's collection. And we're going to look at what they mean for you, the listener,
Yeah,
in a variety of leadership contexts.
absolutely.
So let's start with the first one.
Okay.
The seed has to die.
Yeah.
What's the essential idea in that metaphor?
So at its core, right, the seed has to die. It's really saying that for something new to emerge, something old has to end. So whether that's an old belief, an old way of thinking, a process even,
Right.
it has to come to an end for new growth and hope to take root.
And that can be really challenging, especially for the learner who's really trying to learn.
Oh, absolutely.
But sometimes we hold on to ideas, and sometimes those ideas aren't serving us anymore.
Yeah, and we can be very attached to being right.
Exactly.
And then that can actually stifle progress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he uses this example of Ben,
Right.
who's a project manager.
Yeah.
And he realized that his team had become overly dependent on him.
Oh.
And he was the bottleneck for even the smallest of decisions.
I see.
So to allow them to develop their own leadership skills and kind of own their work,
Right.
he had to step back
Yeah.
and let go of some of that control.
So it's about his old role as the decision maker having to die.
Exactly.
Let the new team flourish.
Exactly.
Yeah, that.
So I think for you, the listener, think about what beliefs or maybe disappointments you've had in the past that you might need to let go of to create space for something new.
Yeah, what are those outdated assumptions that could be holding you back?
Right.
Yeah.
How can you shed those to gain a fresh perspective?
Exactly.
Okay, let's go to the next one. This is a familiar one. When one door closes, another one opens.
Oh, yeah, we hear that one a lot, don't we?
All the time.
Yes.
But what's the more profound leadership insight in that?
Well, it's really about when something doesn't work out the way you planned, it actually opens up new possibilities that you may not have considered before. And It's about resilience and being able to reframe what we might initially see as failure as an opportunity.
Yeah. And I think everyone listening to this can think of a time when something they really wanted
Yeah.
didn't happen.
Yeah.
And they ended up being really grateful for that later.
Absolutely.
So Shaw, he uses this example again of Ben,
Yeah.
who applied for a project role that he was really keen on,
Oh, right.
but he didn't get it.
Okay.
But by going through the application process and doing all the interviews,
Yeah.
he actually got a much better understanding of his strengths.
Right.
And when a different role came up that was much more aligned with his long-term goals, he got that one instead.
So that closed door actually led him to a better opportunity.
Exactly.
I like that.
So for you, the listener,
Mm-hmm.
when do you recognize that it's time to stop pushing against a closed door?
Yeah. How do you actively seek out those alternative paths?
Mm-hmm. And what closed doors are you now grateful for?
Yeah. What are the things that didn't work out the way you wanted them to that you're now happy about?
Okay, so the next metaphor is one that offers a bit more hope, the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway here?
Well, I think it's about having hope and being able to see a positive future even when times are tough.
Mm-hmm.
And a good leader can articulate that future to their team even when everybody's feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, because sometimes things feel so all-consuming that it's really hard to see a positive outcome.
Right.
So Shaw, he uses an example of Ben again.
Yeah.
And Ben was leading this project, and it hit a major roadblock.
Okay.
Deadlines were being missed, morale was low, people were stressed.
Yeah.
But he kept communicating the potential positive outcome
Right.
and painting this picture of what success would look like in the future. And that helped the team to push through those challenges.
So we help them to see that light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, what situations allowed you to see that light?
Yeah, and how can you cultivate that ability to imagine a positive future?
Mm-hmm. Even when things feel really challenging,
Yeah.
how can you describe that to your own teams?
Right, because being able to describe that vision to others is so important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about obstacles.
Okay.
The rocks in the way.
Oh, yes.
What's the leadership lesson there?
Well, instead of being defeated by obstacles right away,
Mm-hmm.
this metaphor encourages you to really examine them
Mm-hmm.
carefully
Mm-hmm.
and think strategically about how you can overcome them.
It's that feeling right when you're faced with a huge problem.
Yes.
That feels insurmountable.
Yeah, you just feel stuck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Shaw, he uses this example again of Ben,
Okay.
who was facing this huge organizational problem,
Right.
and he was really frustrated.
Right.
But instead of just staying in that frustration,
Yeah.
he viewed the problem from multiple angles.
Yeah.
He asked for advice from colleagues who had different expertise,
Yeah.
different ways of thinking, and what seemed like this massive rock actually became a series of smaller, more manageable challenges
Right.
that they could overcome.
So that shift in perspective was key to finding the solution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think for you, the listener, who are those individuals that you can reach out to that can offer a different perspective on those obstacles.
Yeah. And what kind of expertise can help you gauge the size of the problem?
Right.
Because sometimes we make them bigger in our minds than they actually are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what satisfaction did you get from overcoming those past obstacles?
Yeah. How did it feel when you finally got over that hurdle?
Okay, let's go to the next one. There has to be an ending before there can be a new beginning.
I like that one.
Yeah, that's a good one. So this really highlights the importance of closure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about being able to fully let go of the past. So whether that's an old project, an old role, or even just an old way of thinking,
Right.
you have to be able to let go of that to fully embrace a fresh start.
And this is especially true when you think about your career,
Right, absolutely.
like when you're moving to a new role, changing teams.
Yes, new project.
Ending old ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Shaw, again, he uses the example of Ben, who was transitioning to a new leadership role.
Okay.
And he made this conscious effort to ensure that he was handing over his old role properly.
Right.
So he made sure all the tasks were properly finalized and that he mentored his successor.
Ah.
And by having that clean break, he was able to focus on his new challenges.
And he acknowledged the contributions of his previous team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, what constitutes a good ending that allows you to move forward?
Yeah. And how well can you avoid dwelling on past scenarios?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are the things that hinder your ability to start anew?
Exactly. Okay.
Right.
So a bird's eye view.
Yeah.
This also speaks about the importance of perspective.
Right, but in a slightly different way.
So, the light at the end of the tunnel, that's about envisioning a positive future.
Right.
But a bird's eye view is about gaining a broader perspective on your current situation. Like almost like stepping back and seeing the bigger picture.
It's when you're feeling overwhelmed by the day-to-day, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And you just feel trapped.
You can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly.
Jones.
So Shaw gives the example of Ben again.
Okay.
And Ben, whenever he would feel stuck on a problem, he would imagine himself rising above the situation.
Okay.
And almost like looking down on himself and the team.
Okay.
And he could see patterns that he hadn't noticed before and roadblocks and opportunities.
Wow.
And this helped him to see solutions that he hadn't considered before.
That's really interesting. So for you, the listener, when you're feeling overwhelmed, how can you broaden your perspective?
Yeah, and what becomes clearer when you take that higher view?
What ideas does that give you about the path ahead? Yeah, how can you detach from the emotion of the situation and see it more objectively?
Okay, so the next one.
Yeah.
The next mountain to climb.
Yes.
So this one's about motivation and ambition.
Right. And it's about balancing the recognition of current achievements with the pursuit of future goals.
It's that feeling of wanting to constantly strive for something more.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes we forget to celebrate the wins along the way.
Yeah, exactly. So Shaw, he uses the example of Ben once again.
Okay.
And Ben realized that he had a tendency to always focus on what was next.
Okay.
And he didn't often celebrate those milestones that he and the team had already passed.
Ah.
And his team felt underappreciated.
Right.
So he learned to recognize and celebrate those achievements before moving on to the next thing.
So it's not just about reaching the summit. It's
Right.
about enjoying the journey as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener,
Mm-hmm.
how does discussing those future challenges with your team help to motivate everyone?
And what mountains can you choose to bypass?
Right.
You know, do you need to climb every mountain, or are there some that you can just walk around?
Exactly. And how do the people around you support you when you need to be bolder or even when you need to step back?
Right. What kind of support system do you have in place?
Okay, last one in this section.
Cool.
Don't jump over the edge without looking how far you might fall.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
This is all about risk assessment.
It's about really considering the consequences
Mhm.
of your words and actions
Mm.
before you do something.
It's that balance, right, between taking initiative and also being cautious.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So Ben, he actually trained himself to consider the potential negative consequences of his decisions.
Oh, wow.
So he would ask himself, what's the worst that could happen if this doesn't work out?
Right.
What could be the impact on the team,
Smart.
on the organization? And he would even seek input from key colleagues to get their buy-in and also broaden his perspective.
Yeah, because sometimes we can be so focused on our own ideas that we don't see the potential pitfalls.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So for you, the listener, how well can you assess the impact of your suggestions, both positive and negative?
And what are the fears that hold you back from taking risks?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
What
emboldens you to take a leap?
Yeah.
So that was a really fascinating look at just a handful of the metaphors that Shaw explores in his book.
It is. And it's amazing how such simple phrases can unlock such profound insights about leadership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the real value is in applying them right,
Absolutely.
engaging with those reflective questions.
Yeah. And thinking about how you can actually use these metaphors in your own life.
Exactly.
I know.
So for you, the listener, I encourage you to take some time and think about those metaphors that we discussed today and how they might resonate with your own experiences.
Yeah. And whether you're preparing for a meeting, trying to make progress in a new area,
Mm-hmm.
or just curious about leadership,
Mm-hmm.
these insights can be so valuable.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend checking out Shaw's book, The Power of Leadership Metaphors.
It's a really fantastic resource.
It is.
You know, for anyone who wants to learn more about leadership in a very concise way.
Yeah, it gives you those aha moments
It does.
without feeling overwhelmed.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you're interested in going even deeper, there's nearly 200 prompts waiting for you in the book to discover. And you can also explore his 4 V's of leadership framework.
Yeah, and remember, these metaphors, these are tools for ongoing reflection and development.
Exactly.
It's not a one-time thing.
Not a one-time thing.
You can keep coming back to these.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So my final thought for you today is to think about a time when a metaphor unexpectedly shifted your perspective on a challenge you were facing.
Ooh, yeah.
What does that tell you about the power of language?
Yeah, it's amazing how language can shape our understanding of the world.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.